Hello, friends. This is the Netarts Friends Church podcast. We are Jesus people, Kingdom of God people, welcoming, yearning, sharing. And we're glad you're connecting here with us. We'd love to connect in person as well. If you're inclined to support this podcast or for more information, just hop on over to netartsfriends.org. That's netartsfriends.org. Let's jump into today's sermon. The most beautiful and life-changing gift that Arlo ever received was a dream. In his dream, Arlo had a friend who invited him over on a Saturday night to watch a movie. And his friend was wearing jeans and a hoodie, and he felt extremely familiar. Arlo felt like, man, I've known this friend my entire life. But in the dream, he couldn't remember the friend's name. They both settled down into his friend's comfy brown couch with a bag of popcorn, and it was his friend's night to choose the movie. And as the movie started, Arlo noticed that things in the movie were familiar. He's like, oh, that's the diner that I grew up ordering pancakes at, and that's where I first learned to ride my bike, was on that street. And I used to play soccer in that soccer field. And he realized, wait a minute, we're watching a movie of my life. And Arlo turned to his friend and he asked incredulously, he says, this is what we're watching tonight? We're watching my life? And Arlo's friend turned to him and said, Arlo, this is one of the most incredible stories ever. You have to watch it. And Arlo remembered feeling confused by his friend's comment, but also it was as if something inside of his chest expanded when his friend said that. There was more room, more space to breathe, all at the same time. He had always wanted his life to be incredible, but he had never felt like his life was incredible. As the movie played, Arlo only had half an eye on the movie. He was watching his friend watch him live his ordinary life, not incredible life. They watched him grow up and be a rascal and feed the dog and break up with his girlfriend and fail chemistry and play soccer and break his leg and lose his keys and so on. His friend kept pausing the movie in the most curious places. He'd pause the movie and he'd turn and he would stare at Arlo. And it was like he had just been stopped dead in his tracks. And Arlo could see tears in the corners of his friend's eyes. His friend's jaw was kind of slack, hanging open, and then it would curl into a smile of marvel and wonder. And his friend kept saying, Arlo, you're incredible. And throughout the movie, this kept on happening, and Arlo didn't know what to say. He didn't understand why his friend was choosing that particular moment to marvel and be astounded and astonished by him. Every time his friend paused the movie to marvel, it was never at the point that Arlo would have held up as impressive or a high moment. But even though he didn't completely understand, every time his friend marveled at him, he felt that feeling again. His chest was expanding. There was more room, more space to breathe. He felt lighter. He felt capable, like his friend saw his truest self and saw how good and beautiful that person was. A moment came in the dream when Arlo's friend in the hoodie and jeans paused the movie at another unexpected point, and he turned to Arlo with eyes full of wonder, and he said, Arlo, you have such incredible faith. And that was the moment when something in the dream snapped into place. Perhaps it was his friend's use of the word faith. Arlo didn't know, but he realized who the friend sitting there on the brown couch in the hoodie and jeans was. This friend who he felt like he knew so well and who knew him so well and was so familiar and who kept getting stopped dead in his tracks, marveling at his incredible faith, this friend was Jesus. And this realization struck Arlo with such force that he woke up. The dream was over, but it also stayed with Arlo. It changed Arlo. It changed everything to carry the image of watching Jesus, watch him live his life. Arlo realized that the places in his story that he thought Jesus might be impressed the most weren't the places where Jesus stopped dead in his tracks in wonder and mystery and said to him, "Wow, you have such incredible faith." But he also carried this image that Jesus does stop dead in his tracks and says, "Oh my goodness, you have such incredible faith." He pondered this dream, he meditated on this dream, and it changed him to imagine Jesus with eyes full of admiration saying, "You have such incredible faith." What if you could dream Arlo's dream? What if you could watch Jesus watching you live your life? Are there moments in your life that take Jesus' breath away and he has to pause the movie of your life with tears of joy and say, "You have such incredible faith"? And are any of those moments the moments that you expect Jesus to say that? And what might it do within you to hear Jesus say this? "You have such incredible faith." Well, it brings us to our gospel story today. And I want to invite you to do more than stand outside of this story today. I want to invite you to find your story within the story. Enter into this story. Use this story as a way of watching Jesus watch you living your life. What if this story I'm about to read to you is in some way like a miniature picture of your life? Notice the many ways this story captures a picture of how you relate to yourself and to others and to Jesus. And notice what Jesus celebrates and notice what causes him to marvel. So, here's the story, Luke chapter 7, starting in verse 1. When Jesus had finished saying all of this, so he just gave the Sermon on the Plain, to the people who were listening, he entered Capernaum. There, a centurion's servant, or slave, who his master valued highly, or who was precious to him, was sick and about to die. The centurion heard of Jesus and sent some elders of the Jews to him, asking him to come and heal his servant. When they came to Jesus, they pleaded earnestly with him, "This man deserves to have you do this because he loves our nation and he's built our synagogue." So Jesus went with them. He was not far from the house when the centurion sent friends to say to him, "Lord, don't trouble yourself, for I don't deserve to have you come under my roof. That's why I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you. But say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes, and that one, come, and he comes. I say to my servant or slave, do this, and he does it." When Jesus heard this, he was amazed at him. He marveled at him. And turning to the crowd following him, he said, "I tell you, I've not found such great faith even in Israel." And then the men who had been sent returned to the house, and they found the servant well. How is it that the faith that stopped Jesus in his tracks and caused Jesus' jaw to go slack in marvel and mystery and wonder was the faith of someone who, according to Luke's gospel, had never met Jesus, someone who uninvited Jesus to his house, a pagan, a person whose position as a military officer required him to celebrate the gospel of Caesar as Lord, to worship the Roman emperor and promise all allegiance to him, a person who represented the backbone of the violent brute machine of power occupying Jesus' homeland, the Roman Empire, a commander of 100 soldiers, that's what a centurion is in the empire, that was oppressing the people of God, a slave owner, a person of corrupt wealth who made 15 times more money than the average soldier and who had the power to broker imperial resources for or against the local community. How do we find our story in this story? The centurion first sent a group of village elders saying that he was worthy. That's their message. It's this guy deserves to have Jesus do this for you, or to have you do this for him. You know, there are moments in the movie of your life that you are the one trying to work out your own worthiness equation, trying to solve it. You slip into an assumption that everything is earned and that everything is transactional, and you're searching for someone to tell you that you're good enough, that you're special and precious and worthwhile and worthy, and that there's going to be plenty. And when you're trying to work out the worthiness equation, like this guy, that's the message he sends with these messengers is, look at what he's done. He's worthy of you doing this. You inevitably get other people involved in trying to help you solve your worthiness equation. You just do. It happens. The reason the village elders vouched for the centurion was because they wanted his ongoing help with their projects. So you try to get other people to buy into and vouch for your own worthiness and to praise you. And your claims to fame may not be, I love this nation or I built this synagogue, but you want other people to know what you've done and what you've been through and what you know and what you have to offer and all the work you've put in, and you. Your sense of identity is tied up so much in what you do and what other people say about you, and that exaggerated focus bleeds into everything, and sure, it comes out in unhealthy ego and people-pleasing attempts and workaholism and scarcity mindset and on and on and on. And if you think that sounds harsh, I think it's just human. Trying to solve the worthiness equation is just part of the human equation. It's something we all wrestle with, including me. To share personally, I've had seasons in my life when I didn't even fully realize it at the time, but I was trying to work out the worthiness equation. And one of the things that it affected was the way I listened to other people. No matter what they said, no matter what story they told, when I was really struggling with the worthiness equation, what I wanted to say next, at least what I wanted to say, was not a comment or question that would take us further into their story and their experience and who they are and explore that more. What I wanted to say next was a story about me and what I've done and what I've been through and who I am and what I know and all the work I've put in. I was looking for people to respond the way the village elders responded to the centurion, like with some kind of praise and respect and admiration and appreciation. I want people to say, he deserves this. That's just being honest. Like, that's what I want. And I don't think I'm alone in that. The irony is that your attempts to solve the worthiness equation often result in what you might call the crowning achievements of your life, your highlight reel. And some people confuse all of those successes and accomplishments with faith. When you present Jesus with all of your I'm worthy equations, notice in the story, Jesus comes your direction. He's coming to your house. He cares about you. He's coming your way. But the farther you go into the story, the more you realize, well, wait a minute, it's not because of your synagogue building. It's not because of your love for your nation. It's not because of your impressive friends. That isn't the faith that stops Jesus in his tracks and causes him to marvel. So, what we did in our Sunday gathering, and I'd invite you to reflect on this, or if you're listening with a friend, chat with them. Pause to find your story in the story. So here's the question. When are you the person trying to convince important people to sing your praises and owe you favors and get things to go your way? So take a moment and just reflect on your life. When are those kinds of thoughts and behaviors and motivations going on in your life? All right, let's move on. The centurion sent a second group to Jesus, not the village elders, but Roman friends. And their message, it's interesting, it ran in the opposite direction to the first message. The first message is, I am worthy. The second message is, I am not worthy, ... but. There are moments in the movie of your life when you try to solve the worthiness equation in a different way. You drive off the opposite side of the road. I'm not worthy, but. The Roman centurion knew that if he entered Jesus' house, that would make Jesus ritually unclean in his community, which was a big deal, and it would be an inconvenience to Jesus. And so the centurion uninvited Jesus to his house. Now, there's a lot that we could say about this, but one important thing to notice is the almost passive-aggressive quality here. So notice that on the one hand, the centurion is saying, I'm not worthy. So he's saying, I don't want to trouble you with my problems. I can't even face you. I'm a Roman military commander. I boss soldiers around who are occupying and oppressing your homeland. I have slaves. I boss them around too. So I'm not worthy. He's being honest about his life of crime. He isn't putting his best foot forward anymore. It's as if he knows that none of that really squares up with Jesus's mission of good news for the poor and freedom for prisoners and sight for the blind and delivering the oppressed. Like, none of that really squares up with Jesus' mission. But on the other hand, then the centurion doesn't just say, I'm not worthy, so you don't have to heal my slave. There's a but in there. But say the word. So it's, I still want what I want. I want you to heal my slave. In fact, I want to tell you how to go about it. I want to tell you how to do it so you don't have to inconvenience yourself. So just say the word. Use your power in the same way that I use my power every day to boss soldiers and slaves around. Now, it isn't uncommon for people to confuse these moves with faith. Some people think that in order to have faith, they have to hyper-focus on their unworthiness. And so they go into this mode where they're literally like, they think that coming to God is, oh, I'm just a worm. Like they can't recognize that God created them very good and created in his image. For others, faith is all about getting Jesus to use their kind of power to accomplish what they want, which is what's going on with the centurion in this story. Relating to Jesus as the great physician, as the healer, as the savior, as the redeemer of all creation is different than trying to control the situation by telling Jesus what to do. Notice that Jesus never even addresses the worthy or the unworthy statements. It's like he doesn't bite. He doesn't give them any attention whatsoever. And also notice that Jesus did not do what the centurion told him to do. The centurion told Jesus to just say the word. Like, Jesus, just be the boss. Just use the kind of power that I use. And notice that Jesus never spoke the word. Yes, Jesus cared about the dying slave, for sure. Yes, when the friends went home, the slave was well. But in front of all the crowds, with the opportunity to really show his power off and just say the word, Jesus never used that kind of power and authority that the centurion was telling him to use. He never said the word. So, pause to find your story in the story here. When are you the one feeling unworthy and not communicating your wishes face to face? Like this guy is like, I can't even come see you. But you are simultaneously trying to control the way others handle the situation, including God. So, when are you that person? Take a moment and reflect on that. All right, let's pivot here to talk about slaves and faith in the ancient world. So, slaves were not regarded as people, they were regarded as things. Like once a person became a slave, their name was discarded. They were considered a tool or farm machinery to be managed. They were not considered to have the ability to make moral decisions. Decisions were forced on them and enforced by their master's fist or club or whatever weapon they chose. Slaves couldn't legally own property, clothing, tables, chairs, anything. Their body belonged to their master. Talk about someone at the very bottom of the power structure in their world, the lowest class of people in Roman society. And yet, here was a centurion, a man at the top of the power structure who cared deeply about someone at the bottom of the power structure. The worldwide English translation of Luke 7 verse 2 says, an army officer had a servant whom he loved. That's how that translation reads. The Wycliffe Bible says a servant of a centurion that was precious to him. Bible scholar Craig Keener writes this. He says, during their 20 or so years of service in the Roman army, soldiers were not permitted to marry. They often married only after retirement. By ancient definitions, however, a household could include servants, and household servants and masters sometimes grew very close, especially if they made up the entire family unit. Now, we don't know the nature of this relationship in this story, but there's a moment in the story when the picture of this centurion's love for this slave all comes together and it becomes clear. And that moment is when he calls Jesus Lord. You see, There was only one person that the centurion was supposed to be calling Lord, and that was the Roman Emperor Tiberius Caesar. To call Jesus Lord was to infer that Caesar was not, and it wasn't only the centurion's job that was at stake, it was possibly his life. If word got out that a Roman centurion was calling a Jewish peasant Lord, that could be viewed as treason and possibly result in his own death. Like, Secret Service isn't allowed to call some random person president. Like, that just doesn't fly. The stakes couldn't be higher for the centurion, potentially laying his own life down to be killed by the empire that he'd helped to create in an attempt to save the life of someone at the very bottom of society who he'd come to love dearly and quite possibly view as family. Here the centurion was, sticking his neck out, laying his power down for someone who couldn't stick their neck out for themselves, someone who was desperately in need of the good news and shalom that Jesus declared, the well-being, the peace that Jesus declared. What was the faith that caused Jesus to marvel? The two English words, faith and faithfulness, are both captured by this same Greek word, pistis. Bible scholar Nijay Gupta points out that in the ancient world, if you just ask the average person on the street in ancient Palestine, like, hey, what does this word pistis mean? 99% of them would say, well, it's a willingness to bind yourself to a person or group. It's like the you can count on me factor. It's loyalty, allegiance, reliability, social concord, relationship. We've already encountered this word once in Luke's Gospel, Luke 5, verse 20, when Jesus was preaching a really great sermon in a house, and he was interrupted by these friends who started doing vandalism to the house, property damage, mess making, and they tore this big old hole in the roof and lowered their paralyzed friend in front of Jesus. And to everyone else, what they did must have looked highly inappropriate. Like, dude, you cannot interrupt a sermon like that. You can't tear someone's house apart. But the scripture says that Jesus saw their faith. They had a you can count on me factor with their friend. It was like, we are going to get you in front of Jesus. Throughout the New Testament, we see faith and love as so intertwined that they are inseparable. Like, you cannot have one without the other. Love for God and love for neighbor, they go together. As the Apostle Paul says, the only thing that counts is faith expressing itself through love. If I have faith to move mountains but have not love, he says, I am nothing. So, are you beginning at all to see what stopped Jesus in his tracks? He was encountering love for God and love for neighbor coming together in this man's life, this centurion's life, in an extraordinary way, where someone at the top of their world was risking everything for someone at the bottom of their world, while simultaneously proclaiming publicly their allegiance to a Jewish peasant instead of the Roman emperor. There are moments in the movie of your life when you forget yourself. You get caught up in someone else's well-being, good news being brought to the poor, freedom for prisoners, sight for the blind, setting the oppressed free. You get caught up in your love for someone who Jesus loves. You get caught up in the you can count on me factor. I'll be there. So much so that you lay your power down. You stick your neck out for them. You put your reputation on the line. You fully accept that this might cost you some time, some money, your rights, your safety, your power. And you're self-forgetfully just caught up in this moment of caring for this person in a way that connects with the depth of Jesus's care for that person. You're not trying to do Jesus's job for him. You aren't trying to tell Jesus how you would do it. You fully trust Jesus as Lord to be every bit as good and kind and loving as he is. And you're so caught up in your care for them, you hardly realize that faith is happening. You're joining with the mission of Jesus. And Jesus stops dead in his tracks. And tears form in the corner of his eyes. And a smile spreads across his face. And he turns to you and he says, "You have such incredible faith." A final reflection question. What's coming up for you as you find your story within this story? What parts feel confusing? What parts cause your chest to expand with more room, more space to breathe? What parts make you feel lighter, capable, seen for the person Jesus knows you to be? Thank you for joining us for a Sunday sermon from Netart's Friends Church. We hope you'll join us soon for one of our in-person worship gatherings. For more information, hop on over to netartsfriends.org. God's peace be with you, friends.